What's good, everybody? You know what time it is. It is time for Elevated Vibes right here on IntellectualRadio.com, a iHeart radio station. Now, you know the deal. In this conversation, the number to call, 708-223-8953, or hit us up on Facebook Live. Everybody, it is Men's Health Month, right?
Mental health.
Yeah, it is
Men's mental health month.
Oh, okay, I was right. I apologize. So
you need some medication.
well, medicated. Anyhow,
Yeah,
anyhow, though, so a lot of times we had that stigma that we can keep going and going and going, and we don't need nothing. We just keep pushing through it. But truth be told, we need help too. So y'all know the deal. It's your boy Abdul Rashid, along with
the boss man
and
Tim.
That's right, Mr. Timothy Evans. We are Elevated Vibes. So let's jump in this conversation. All right, everybody. Well, how are you all feeling?
When people ask that question, it's so typical that we say, I'm doing well, doing fine,
Mm-hmm.
But I think there are times when we do need to check in with each other, and you have to be, I'm about a full on a 10 today.
Full on a 10.
Whatever. I mean, today, part of it is just, I want to say physiological. I went to bed late, headache, and the worries that come with having a headache at a certain age.
Yeah,
what that means, and
body check of everything and so forth.
Yeah, so you hope that it's just a good night of rest, and things like that, and just sometimes rest is the medicine that you need.
That's true.
But in this hustle mentality, hustle economy that has been perpetrated on all of us, that somehow relaxation or working is laziness.
Mm-hmm.
That stigma of being a provider, and that somehow being a provider is limited to your financial resources, especially and I think that's what the red pill movement is about. Don't get me wrong, there some misogyny in there, absolutely, but there's also a part of it that is dealing with that angst and anxiety that comes with being a man in society, the inability to share emotions, the need to be hard all the time, especially as Black men. We don't smile, and all of that stuff, and so it takes a toll, and I believe there is a reason that the Y chromosome doesn't last as long as the X chromosome.
Real interesting. Mr. Evans.
I definitely think that culturally we have some expectations, and being African American or Black in this country, you have expectations that are sometimes unrealistic. I think about the one thing I heard in the past, that when African Americans go to the hospital, doctors think that their paying thresholds are more than they can actually handle. You know what I mean? If you tell them that you are a 10, for example, in pain, they might think you're only 5. They don't.
They treat you as you only a 6 or 7.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And one thing that I noticed when researching this topic was all the angles that the things that are coming at our mental togetherness. It comes from all different kind of angles, right? Socio-economic, physical. It comes from so many directions we don't even recognize it sometimes. You have to deal with past trauma. You have to deal with historical issues. You have to deal with the dynamic between men and women in this country. The fact that a lot of African American women do better educationally, and we are thought of to be the providers of our families when the stats just don't show that. So we're dealing with a lot of things.
And I think part of that though is we're buying into that. Being a provider is more than my financial resources. More than the sum of my financial resources. And it may have been the long-term plan because men across the board, whether African American or Caucasian or whatever, are falling behind in advancement in terms of education. When I talk about education, I'm talking about the book education. We have sourced out our manufacturing jobs, which were the bread and staple of many middle-class families coming up. The rising cost of living meant that the women had to go into the workforce in order to make it and survive. That you no longer could, the man just work, and so provide for the family. The lack of high-paying jobs that are not related to education. So we're looking at the fall of, the crafts and the trades, and not promoting those. These are all things that contribute, and even our expectations of ourselves. The lack of resources. We've said it on this program many a times. If you are a single man and homeless, there's very few places you can go. Heck, and we don't even want to talk about how men also to experience domestic violence. Yet, there's no resources or places for men to go if they need to leave the home. Men can be divested of their wealth that they spent a lifetime of accumulating, because even though they're supposed to be courts of equity, and I believe 75 to 80% of all women initiate divorces, and we have the no fault statute, the reallocation of those resources traditionally fall upon the men. Men typically tend to suffer even in relationships. That men tend to stay longer in relationships, and by suffering I mean their bedrooms, unhappy, all of those things. Men tend to stick it out for the purposes of family.
So because we deal with these things such as depression, anxiety, and
We
this
don't deal with it.
I mean, well, we endure it. Let
Yes,
me
that's a better word.
correct myself, and that's fine. And PTSD. How do we flip that script? Because, like I said in the beginning, we're so pushed just to, not stop and ask for help. We're so pushed to, just keep digging, and you can make it through. You can make it through when oh, well, you feel this depression may be coming upon, if you understand what depression is, or maybe some of those effects of PTSD as we learn more and more about it. How do we change the mentality to say, let me go get some help?
Well, first of all, I think we have to take away the stigma that exists, and I think we're getting better at it around seeking mental health. And unfortunately, it's not covered by insurance unless you're a threat to someone else or are threatening to kill somebody. Then and then it has to be immediate. If I say I'm gonna kill you tomorrow, they may not have a space for me.
Yeah.
At the mental health facility. The stigma of being emotionally vulnerable that exists for men, like they all you hear about is like, oh, I want a man that's emotionally vulnerable, and the studies have shown that when the men are in couples counseling and they break down and become emotional, and the women tend to lose their respect for those men, and so you say you want me to be emotionally vulnerable and all of that, but yet when he opens up in this counseling, we see across the board that, there's a loss of, things like that. The lasting stigma of, man up and just take it. Men's inability, even within safe circles, to be vulnerable with each other. We know that, there's an isolation of men that's going on right now, especially with the decline in dating and, the fostering of animosity between, people. I would say the lack of accountability from the other side. Like when we're telling you something, there's this angst to push back. Well, the whataboutism, we engage in that whataboutism. Well, what about this? It's like, okay, your issue is right, but we're talking about this right now.
Yes.
The lack of acknowledgement.
Okay.
These are all things that, contribute to the angst and, the drive that men feel to succeed, to build. And also, and I'm going to flip the script.
Okay.
We understand as men that, failure is a process. Like failure is never final unless you quit, right? But I think there's growing movement in our society where we are so punishing of failure. Even in something as simple as I've served my time, but you got to go to this place and you can't stay here and you can't stay there,
Right. That goes back to that stigma, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, like you can make a mistake, and, sometimes those mistakes may land you in a place that you don't want to be. But once you've served your time, you're still stigmatized.
That's true.
We are a service society. We're a consumer society. And, one of the things I wanted to, as we were talking about topics, we were thinking about Juneteenth, and, I was going to make this a controversial show. But one of the things that has happened is that we've also, I don't want to say the word is denigrate, but, fathers went from being something serious on TV to being the laughing stock, the comedians, the inept, where, you may have someone like James Belushi, who's married to the hot wife and he's goofy. I think the last serious father, maybe Dan, like
but he was still kind of goofy too.
Yeah, but Dan was. I mean, dads are supposed to be humorous,
right?
You have to balance humor with, you can't be all stick, So, so that changing of the guard, we know that we're always talking about women's issue, but we ignore that men have a higher suicidal rate, or men have, I don't want to say die by suicide. It's, I forget what the appropriate term is, but, and that stems from the lack of relationships.
You know what? It's funny that you said suicide, because suicide is the leading cause for Black men second leading cause, between 15 and 24. So that is, there's some points to that.
Yeah, I don't want to discuss the case too much, but I did have a case where I was representing the female counterpart in the marriage, and I came in at the tail end, and the male counterpart, ended up, terminating his pain, and is, I guess, the polite way to say it.
Okay.
Towards the end, like the only thing that needed to kind of be done was a couple of things to work out. And so, when women go through breakups, they receive support, love, care, even if it's their behavior was less than, exceptional, or they whatever. When men tend to go through those breakups, um, it's taken a little bit harder. They lack the support, the need to feel to carry on. Never mind. Losing half your finances is stressful.
Mhm.
Yes.
And so, but the number one, I think, indicator of that is the lack of connections with someone else. Like, it happens when it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I have no one to call. I got to call the prevention line, and of course they can talk to me, but at those times, you want someone who knows you.
And I was just about to say too, you're calling, even though, yeah, the line is for that, but
Yeah.
you're still calling a stranger.
Right.
And
what you value is connection.
Exactly.
And that lack of connection and that sense of isolation.
Right.
Um, I experience it now. Like, as we grow older and our jobs and our focus does that, you're not in connection with what I always call the wolf pack.
And that's one of the things that contributes for the United States being an individualist kind of society rather than a collective society. The isolation, right? You're trying to have your own achievements instead of trying to achieve things for the group, or a group of guys trying to do things together. You want your own stuff, right? So yeah, that's going to leave you isolated, right? Also, I think that one of the issues with mental illness that I don't think that has been addressed is kind of like the physical side. I don't know if people understand how they should take care of themselves, right? So you're saying like lack of sleep, eating the right kind of foods and things like that. That also contributes to our stress levels. If we're always feeling sick, you're going to think that you are sick. You know, um, the lack of exercise. I know we got a kind of society where you don't need to do a lot of exercise. The guys don't need to go out and uh, do the farm work, or hunt for the animals, but we still have the bodies for that kind of activity, right?
Right.
And but I would also say that there's also like this pressure, and we don't talk about the male body image. We grew up on, He-Man, G.I. Joe, the ripped abs. You got to remember, we are of the age where bodybuilding took off. You can be a plus size female and still find acceptance.
Mhm.
And we have colloquial terms like plus size and all of that. You don't have that for guys,
Mm.
And there's also, there is no supporting of like, yo, if, I mean, just as guys, if, Rich, 400 pounds and you in the basement and you playing video games and that's all you doing, your guy's going to tell you about it, whereas on the flip side, we celebrate diversity of bodies for women. You know what I'm saying? But where's all the commercials that, come on for men,
But do you not think that, because I understand what you're saying and I agree with you, what a lot of that was a push by women for that acceptance. Do you think that us as men sometimes we don't push for that? Because I do remember back in the day, you know, there were women saying, "Hey, I'm a person too, just because I'm not what you've been, you know, pushed upon with the model look and so forth, I'm a person too." You understand what I'm saying? And us as men, have we pushed for that?
I
Because at
think
least the women did push for it.
no.
Yeah.
I think not only did they push for it, but then when there was talk on the other side, we get into that debate of what aboutism. Like, where is the ribbon for prostate cancer? We have breast cancer awareness month. We have self-examination for that. But we don't talk about prostate health.
Yeah, I mean that's something that's starting to be pushed now, but
Right.
it took a long time
It
for that.
took a long time.
Yeah, right.
So
And as people, those famous people who passed, just for example, Chadwick Boseman. You know what I'm saying? That got pushed and got put into the limelight. While before it didn't, and your doctor may talk about it by the time you're 50, but sometimes that's too late. Example, Chadwick Boseman.
Yeah. I mean, think about, the high suicide rate, but why don't we talk about it for men? Like we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the isolation. Japan has engaged in a governmental program, to try to take the isolation away that a lot of them have. We don't do that here. The separation of families. We talked about the decline of the first cousins. Those familial connections. And I'll be honest, the I don't know how you say it, but like making bad men's organizations. Something, I mean, like, think about it. When we were coming up, the Boy Scouts were huge.
Yes.
Now, try to find you a troop, but you can find Girl Scouts on every time selling cookies, and things like that. All men gyms were discriminatory, and so you open them up, the hell, I mean, even going to the, how do I say, the place where they artistically remove their clothes and dance to music, and their pole in the middle of the room has been, delegitimized, So, I mean, many a person has been supported going through college going there. So, so, and it wasn't necessarily about, I mean, it was, but it was also about the camaraderie. Yes. And the brothership. And so those things have been taken away. Poker night, I never played it, but you always heard about it, where guys just get together. Bowling leagues.
I mean, some of that is still there, like you said, the bowling league, just for example, it's still there, but it's not pushed to the forefront. How maybe back in the 80s it was, you know what I'm saying? And you've always heard, I don't know how to play poker either, but you always heard about the poker nights. Come on,
let's teach you how to take your money. So, something like that.
Right.
And here's the thing, and I always thought about it. Guys need an activity to engage in. Like, we're not gonna just like, oh yeah, come over and I mean, if we are, you playing video games, or we playing video games if you coming over, watching a movie or something.
So do y'all feel things should be a little more stoic for men? You know what I'm saying?
Stoicism is the problem.
Okay.
First of all, you have to recognize the dynamic, but how men work. We commiserate around some type of activity, fixing the car, barbecuing, bowling, basketball, video games.
Right.
There has to be some type of activity involved, and when you don't have that, it's hard for men to get together, especially as an adult, because you're typically going to play video games with the boy you grew up with, or, around the same age. Now with the rise of the headset and gaming online, you've kind of lost that, And there's something different about someone being in your physical space than,
10 miles away.
10 miles away. Yeah.
I get that.
There was something to be said about come over and playing Madden, talking trash. It was an opportunity to get together. Now, it may be the Super Bowl, maybe a boxing, maybe a UFC fight.
Right.
But that lack of a wolf pack,
Mhm.
Is destabilizing. And as I said, even as we grow older, and we focus on work and, we're all reaching the epitome of our careers, you look up and, you haven't spoken to your boy in 3 months,
That's true.
You haven't reached out, and
The rest of life have kind of taken over.
Right. And so sometimes you're just left saying, well, why don't he call me? Or, I don't want to. And also, I don't want to be a burden to somebody.
Yeah.
And that also makes it challenging for us to reach out and get help, because we have not learned that asking for help is a sign of strength, not a weakness.
Now, I might be remembering this wrongly, but
that happens at your age. Yeah,
I know, little by little,
Yeah.
So, when I was younger, it seemed to me like guys were mostly interested in the same thing. You can catch most of the guys that you knew doing the same things, right? So I'm thinking about like my father, my uncles, and his friends. They will always get together, talk politics, right? Or they will always get together, talk about the game, or they would do something that I just assume all guys do. Now, if I go to, some of my buddies at work, some of them are not interested in politics. You might find some of them are interested in the games, but it seems like to me in the past, most guys stayed up on politics.
Yep.
It was just something that, we as citizens, we felt that we needed to do. But now it's kind of different. It's like,
willful ignorance.
Right. I don't want to be, that's too heavy, to be thinking about. That's too deep. I'd rather think about something, that eases the tension. I'd rather think about the game or something else. Maybe
Escapism.
something that came on TV or, so that's kind of like an element that is thrown in there. You have to kind of find your tribe more,
and it's harder
than it used to be.
It's harder to find your tribe now.
It is. It's very difficult because people are doing everything. So yeah, that's definitely one of the things that
I've always thought about, like, the guys who are represented in divorce. Like, is there a club like you can just go through, like, and just commiserate? Because often after the battle is over, it's just you. And there's a adjustment period, where, you have someone around, now you don't, that we need to glean of the knowledge of those who have gone before us. If you're going through something, chances are you're not the first, definitely won't be the last. So there's that knowledge that men pass on through oral education, as I would call it. It's like, oh man, yeah, I got you, dog. This is what you need to do. Or, man, go join. Hey, dog, listen to me, man. Go join this cooking class, dog. Go join this cooking class.
Right.
Man, what are you talking about, dude? Like, trust me, player. Go to the cooking class,
So, I mean, some of that would have probably saved a lot of marriages, right? If you were in a group and the guys was like, hey, listen, this is what you're doing wrong. And this is what you don't understand right here, right? And if you did this, then, maybe it'll help out.
Our fourth member, and he's checking us out online, and thank you, bruh. Big E for the D, he posed a question. Do you guys think that it is better for a black man to talk to a therapist that is black or versus someone who is not? Give me your thoughts.
I think if I could have the choice, yeah, I would prefer, because they would know where I'm coming from. Um, I think that they can understand kind of the historical background. I think I'll feel at ease talking to them. Maybe I'll be more open with my conversation if I had somebody who I can relate to better. So, yeah.
Wholeheartedly, not only Black, but male. You know, we all exist within a cultural paradigm, and there are things that take place that if I said it to you, you understand because you have the cultural, and it's not racial. It's just, and I'm talking not just racial. I'm talking like as a man, you know, things that can be said by the fair gender, that if it was a dude would get you punched in the face, and explaining that to someone who doesn't, because, for men, it's a lot about respect. You know what I'm saying? So if I don't have to take like, well, what the question may be, if you're talking to someone, maybe, well, why was that disrespectful? Because if it was a dude, I hit him in his mouth. That's why it's disrespectful,
Right.
Right. To not have to go that extra step to have to explain that, I think matters. I mean, even in the, my system, working within the law, there, when I was coming, first out of law school, and, you appoint a guardian ad litem or a child rep. And these are the people who go out and, investigate the home and stuff like that. And, if there was spanking, paddling, all of that, I would pray that it would be a person of color,
Right.
because, to those that lack the melatonin, and this was first a grounds for, abuse, that this is abuse.
Mhm.
Any of that was abuse. And what you have to understand is that A, culturally it's accepted, B, you also have to understand the historical context behind spanking. And, the rationale being is that if I allow you to disrespect me out here, you might do it to someone out there, and then I have to bury you.
I understand.
So I need to get you to comply immediately and to, do what I think is in the best of your interest. Well, when you have not had to deal with in this case, racial aspects of growing up in this society, to use the spanking is bad. Whereas to us, it's life-saving measure. The spanking always is the precursor to the talk. Put your hands out the window.
Right. Right.
Turn on the dome light.
Right.
Yes, sir. No, sir. Even to the point where we, answer the officer's question. Well, what happens if they wrong? I don't have to answer their questions, but, the job is for you to get back home. Take the disrespect.
Mhm.
Even, the mental health that goes into, raising your children that men have to deal with, from the minute they were born, our boys are seen as threats. And it is my responsibility, my duty, my obligation to raise men who will contribute to society, who will do something and not become a burden to society. Because, no matter, I still call my boys baby, baby this, baby that.
Right.
Both of them, depending on the way the earth is tilting, are taller than me. Caught that, right? So,
Yeah.
so
Totally understandable,
yeah.
man.
So, but the world sees them as older than what they are and may not afford them the latitude that youthful indiscretion is. I think about, what was the kid in Ohio? His name was Michael, the big guy. When they shot him and left him in the street,
Missouri.
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 Michael Brown.
I understand now what Obama said is, if that, when the guy in Florida got killed, that if that, had a son, he would be him.
Trayvon
Martin. Thank you. And so, I look at both my boys, 18 and 20 respectively, and, they're going to make mistakes. They're supposed to make mistakes. But I know that to those that, may operate in blue, or even, melatonin lacking individuals, sees them as older than what they are.
Yeah.
But why do I have to tell my son, smile and, don't play smaller than what you are?
Exactly.
How about you, Rich?
Well, yeah. To answer his question, yeah, I would definitely look for a therapist that would be African American. Yeah, I would look for that without a doubt. But to add on to it, I also need to see some of the temperament of that therapist. Saying this, even though we are the same color or the same melanin, just like you explained, they still may have a different attitude or temperament against some things that I may be about. And then so in saying that, they may already, even though they may not want to, and they're trying to do their job, they may already prejudge me. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, finding a good therapist is like finding a good dance partner.
Exactly.
But you got to recognize is that there are few and far between.
True.
Yes, I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I was in court. It may have been 50 cases on the docket. When I tell you I looked around the room and I was the only one, the only one.
Understandable.
And you like, huh.
Yeah. And I mean, that is, and especially in the professional setting, that can come up a number of different times.
And so that in itself, trying to find someone.
Yes.
Who
it's a job. It's a job. Agreed. Totally agreed.
Definitely. I mean, and when you going back and forth, trying to get things off your chest, you might throw out the odd reference. You want somebody to get the good times reference.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And
yeah, and so
dang. No,
pretty much. Change it up a little bit, but definitely, I totally get it. But okay, also just to remind people, if you want to get in this conversation, you can hit us up 708-223-8953, or as well, as I say, on Facebook Live. Now, I think some things that need to be put out to people for that they can have understanding, because everybody got that, associate, I would say friend, but I'll go to associate, that you may see if they may be having a mental breakdown, because we're talking about things such as suicide and so forth, and that's usually the prerequisite. Okay. So let me kind of bring a couple of those things out. They're kind of irritable. They got that social withdrawal, mood swings, as we spoke about depression and anxiety, got those emotional outbursts and paranoid about everything. Any other things you guys could think about?
I mean, here's the thing. You have to know when a person is operating out of spec. And being a friend sometimes means pushing beyond that what is comfortable. Being a friend means speaking truth to power. Like, I have to accept what you are saying because I believe it comes from a good place, I remember there was this lady who lived her life as a man for like a couple of months, and she just was blown away by the support that men show each other. One of the things I always remember her saying is, "Oh, men will talk about each other in their face, like dog each other is that culture, um, but when behind each other's backs, they are the most supportive. Oh, that's a good man. That's a good dude. Like, we don't do that put down kind of thing. And so somehow we need to get back to that. I always, think about, like I said, the wolf pack. You got to have your wolf pack. You got to have those, people who know you at your core, know you, that connection, that understands you. Who you're, the genuine you. And it is that lack of connection, that lack of disconsonance or disconnection. I can't remember the word I'm trying to say, but that has contributed to what we're seeing. Not to mention, I think prioritizing things in education that are more beneficial to girls than it is to guys, like recess, movement. We prioritize being able to sit in your seat, being able to listen patiently, and we know that girls are more advanced than guys than that. The focus on reading, and not don't like guys shouldn't be illiterate, but guys tend to do better at the math and sciences. So why aren't we introducing that to them guys at an earlier age? We have to acknowledge that there are some natural differences, and that doesn't make one side right. It doesn't make the other wrong. It just makes the fact that we need each other. We know that one of the things that determines outcome is the household you grow up in, and unfortunately single motherhood tends to lead in a lot of those negative factors, whereas single fathers and married couples tend to have the same kind of outcomes.
One thing that makes me really envious, so sometimes when you go to different countries, right, you see the changes, or the difference between American culture and other countries, right? And I went to the islands, right?
Which one?
I went to Barbados.
Okay.
And
the flying fish.
Yeah, and I was very envious of how relaxed everybody were. They didn't want too much. They had a laid back lifestyle.
Line be 10 people long.
Yeah,
but everybody talking and chilling. Like,
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Y'all only got one person on this register.
It's funny you said that. We was in the line for like 20 minutes. The cashier and the person that was buying the food was having a whole conversation. Nobody said nothing. Everybody was just, relaxed.
Right.
Hey, we got time.
Right.
In America, in this culture that we have in America, it's not like that. I think sometimes we want too much. We think we need too much, and we only need the basic things.
I mean, what we've talked about on the show before, the side hustle. Wait a minute, hold on. I work. Why I have a side hustle? Hold on. Like, yo, you should get you a vending machine. Hey, I got a job, dude. Like, but now I gotta go after work to refill my vending machine. And that's the great fraud. And I know this is not a political show, but take a look at this great, big, beautiful bill that they're trying to pass. I mean, we did a pretty good job this month.
Starting on him today, but go ahead.
I mean, we did a pretty good job this month of not getting into politics, but this, having more a month than check, is a bit much. Right now I'm a multi-dollar-naire. Depending on what gas I might need to go, I might be a single dollar-naire when I get home. So. These are all the things that, contribute to the mental health and the mental conditioning. It's always this, I'm behind, I'm failing kind of thing.
Okay.
You have a caller?
Yeah. Okay, caller, go ahead. Oh, hello.
Did we lose the caller? Call right back.
Hello?
Yep.
Yep.
Go ahead, caller.
Go ahead, man.
All right, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Hey, what's going on, man? This is a great conversation.
No doubt. All right.
Appreciate you. You got a comment?
Oh, just speaking of what all you guys said earlier, you guys hit a lot of points, and that's one of the reasons why I brought up that question I sent you guys earlier. Speaking on my own situation that I was going through, I had went through a big depression phase, like right after my grandmother passed away a few years back, and like even so speaking to like what Tim was saying, I was kind of like. I didn't know I was depressed, so I was just kind of like off to myself. I really wasn't trying to talk to anyone. I mean, my sleep pattern was off. I wasn't eating well at all. And this went on for like a few months, and it actually kind of like took my son to notice how, he noticed how I was acting, and he just walked up to me and said, "Hey, Dad," he's like, "I think you need to get some help. I think there's something wrong with you." Wow. And, that kind of woke me up like, oh, damn, all right, I need to, get some. This is coming from someone that always sees me kind of like, trying to be, live my life, be happy and things like that. And, live, a day to day, having, do things with my son and stuff like that. So for him to recognize that in me kind of like put me on a path to try and like seek help, speaking to the type of therapist, like Mike was saying, it's really hard to find like, a Black male therapist in a lot of areas. And so the place, I went to, there was like none available. So there was this, this Mexican woman that was there. I was like, oh, I guess it's close enough. All right. So I went on.
Right. But, to that, also, and we talked about this last week, the lack of being poured into, and by that I mean the gratitude, that what we do, we're expected to do, and sometimes you just need that replenishment, hey, I see you, good job, hey, and that's why I was speaking so much on it about Father's Day, I went to Walgreens, it was still a bunch of cards, but
Yeah.
the graduation card's gone.
Yeah.
I didn't see no bucket of flowers. Right. And sometimes, it's just about those that you take care of, or those that, and I look at this, retrospectively, knowing what I know now, I've been like, yo, Dad, hey, good job.
Right.
Like, and unfortunately that kind of communication didn't happen until, it was time for his transition. And even, I was grateful to be able to communicate that. But like, to your point, the silently suffering is big, and I think is really huge in our community, because, we've always been told, well, what you complaining about?
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
And
then it was good that your son came to you, because a lot of times, and that's what I was speaking about with the the signs, of like maybe depression and so forth. You have to go, if you see somebody with having an issue or whatever, don't be afraid to go talk to them, just like your son stepped up to you. You know what I'm saying? Because that put you on a different road. You know what I mean? Because you could have kept going through it. You would have kept going through it. You know what I mean?
I would have. You're right. I would have. And kind of like putting a exclamation point on some of the points you guys were getting earlier. I think that when that happened, it was kind of like you ever hear that metaphor about so I'm like kind of like a pot that's about to boil over, and a couple more drops and everything's gonna pour over the side. And so I think when that happened, it just kind of it kind of put another layer on top of the other stuff that I had already was dealing with or just had kind of like repressed. And so, that just caused me into, shoot into this depression. So when I was speaking to the therapist, even though it wasn't, my ideal therapist that I would talk to, at the very least, I could say at least kind of getting out like what was bothering me on a day-to-day, like, job stuff. I mean, trying to run a small business and not being where you want to be, my credit, man, I want to buy this and I can't get it. And I want to get this for my son. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it was like all this other stuff that I never really got a chance to, talk to anyone else about. And so when I started talking to a therapist about it, at least for me, that helped me kind of realize like, okay, I need to, start talking about this stuff a lot more, because I didn't know I had repressed all this stuff. Because like you guys said, we just kind of train to just say, hey, deal with it. Everyone else seems to be able to kind of like talk about their problems and what's going on, and we're expected to listen. But no one, it doesn't really happen the other way around that often. And hey man, if you got a good woman that's going to listen to you and be that, and be that ear for you, that's great.
Right. With the hope that it don't come back to that they don't use it against you. That's the like
the ammunition for later, right?
Right. Yeah. Like, oh, okay. Well, you remember that time that oh no, you ain't about to and then you end up shutting down. And to your point, I don't think it's like we repress it. It's like, my doctor says you just get so used to operating in crisis, you don't even know what peacetime looks like.
Yeah, that's true.
No doubt. You have a bunch of cannonballs rolling around on your ship, and you just so used to jumping over the cannonballs as they roll, you just think this is normal, until finally it's so many cannonballs rolling around, and you sitting there saying to yourself, why are so many cannonballs rolling around? Like, the job, like you said, being an entrepreneur, the struggle of being an entrepreneur. You spoke something that, speaks to me, like, there's nothing worse than when your child wants something and you can't get it. Not because, they don't deserve it. It's because
you just can't get it.
Was they say in that famous, it was the caddy I lacked.
Right. There it is. There it is.
And I don't think that's something that, our female counterparts understand. Like, I am supposed to, do that. Like, what did Chris Rock say? If Billy can't read because he ain't studied, that's mama's fault. If he can't read because the lights ain't on, that's daddy's fault. And that's a heavy burden that I just don't think they understand. I remember. Do y'all remember? And we're gonna wrap up with this because I know we're coming to the top of the hour. But you remember that episode on Good Times where James was out of a job? He had just lost his job and they had to go pay the rent because the maintenance man was going to put them out.
Talking about the one where he went to go shoot pool.
Man, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that episode.
I know the one.
That man had $15. He had to go make that rent. And Florida was like, James, don't do it. Like, so can you imagine like that pressure? And this man's like, I got $15. My wife is telling me not to do it, but I only got, what Eminem said, I got one shot. Failure is success is my only option. Failure is not.
Right.
Yeah.
That is a pressure that only someone who we can only understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because look at what he had to do. He had to defy his wife and say, I hear what you're saying, but I got enough faith in me.
I got to go do what I got to do.
I got to go do what I got to do.
Right.
This $15 that we got right now, it ain't enough to save us, and it ain't enough to get us where we got. So I got to go out here and in spite of what you saying, do what I got. And remember and I think they got the money in between time, but he came home.
He came home,
pulled off that hat.
with that money,
Yep.
which was $107. I remember the
Oh
exact
my
amount.
God,
Yes, I remember
Yeah.
the exact amount.
Yeah.
No
Keeping
doubt.
my head above water. That I mean,
no doubt.
as we get older, you start listening to some of these songs, and you're like, "Oh my God, they were singing Bible."
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I mean, we're gonna end with this, but that famous show that used to come on CBS that took place in Balls Hall, just a good old boy, never meaning no harm.
Mm-hmm.
Beast all you ever saw, been in trouble with the law since the day they were born. Tell me that don't apply to our president. So, but I want to finish with that one.
But before we get out of here, real quick, y'all, and definitely thank you for calling, brother.
Thanks for calling.
But
Hey, no problem, man. No problem. It's a great discussion, man. I just wanted to I'm trying to knock out these as personal training certification classes, man. But I wanted to chime in because it's a good discussion, man.
Yeah,
definitely, man. That definitely appreciate that, brother.
All
right. But real quick, I just wanted to put out some names of some organizations for men's mental health. Some are local, and other ones you got to get on the web.
Arnie's is closed.
We ain't gonna walk in that door. We got one called New Choice Intervention Incorporated. That is 142 East 154th Street in Harvey. We got the Safer Foundation. That is 808 South Kedzie in Chicago. We got Encompass Counseling Center. That is 1809 North Mill Street in Naperville. And online, you got betterhelp.com and the Black Man Project.
Oh, and I'm going to throw it out there. If you're desperate and in need, ChatGPT, and I think Gemini also have modalities that are geared towards therapy.
Oh, wow.
And so you can put in, like, you go into ChatGPT and you go under one of the options and it'll drop down and it'll tell you therapist.
Right.
And, anything beats a blank.
That's true.
Anything beats, because sometimes therapy is not about getting better. It's about redirecting your thoughts. And it helps. Like I said, I truly believe that opposition is just opportunity in disguise.
All right. Any last words, Tim?
I would definitely just say go get the help that you need. Make sure you look out for each aspects of your mental health, your diet, your sleep, and try to reach out as best you can. Find your group.
All right, everyone. This is Elevated Vibes. We will catch y'all next week.
God willing, and the creek don't rise.
Right. There you go.
Peace.
Peace.